So now I've got the bag turned inside out, and I stuffed it with pillows so that we can take a look at it. And from the outside, it looks like it turned out pretty good. However, I'm just not satisfied with the bag, and the main problem is the lid. Now, originally, when I was designing the bag, and I decided to go with this type of lid, I had intended on sewing a roll top collar that folds down inside of the bag, and then when you overstuff the bag, you pull that roll top collar up and allowing you to overstuff it. And then the lid was meant to fit around the top of that. But early on in building the bag, I changed the design and I decided that I didn't want the roll top collar anymore. The main reason that I decided not to use the roll top collar is because I have these two zippers here, one for the mesh pocket and one to access the hydration bladder. And 90% of the time that I'm going to be using this bag, probably 99% of the time I'm going to be using this bag, it's probably not going to be fully stuffed, and I'm not going to need to overstuff it and use the roll top collar. So the roll top collar was meant to fold inward and lay flat against the inside of the bag. And if it was laying flat against the inside of the bag, it would be blocking these two zippers. So I would have to move the collar out of the way every time to access these two zippers, and I just didn't want to deal with that. And I also, another reason is because I also just like my mini Alice pack, and the mini Alice pack doesn't have a roll top collar. It's literally just a drawstring, and I literally just copied that design. This drawstring collar works exactly like the mini Alice pack. Now that I don't have the bag overstuffed and I have the drawstring closed, you'll notice that when I close the lid, it just doesn't sit on top of the bag correctly. And without that roll top collar, there's literally no reason to have this much space on top of the bag underneath the lid. So there's nothing that's ever going to be filling up that space. The other problem is with the lid on there, the bag's just way too tall. This is meant to be a smaller bag, and it sits very high up on your back. This section here stops just short of the small of your back. But with the lid, even if the lid is stuffed, the lid comes up halfway, almost up over your head. So with it sitting up so high on your back and the lid coming up halfway over your head, for one, it just looks ridiculous, but it's not just a matter of looks, it's also function, because the lid is weighing the top of the backpack away from your body, and it doesn't ride correctly. So the lid is just too tall, it's too heavy, and it's just the wrong style of lid for this backpack. If it was the sort of pack that came down lower on your back, and maybe if I had incorporated load lifter straps into the design, it wouldn't be so bad, but it would actually be pretty functional. But for something the size, the size that it is, it's just the wrong lid for the backpack. I've given a lot of thought as to what I want to do to fix it, and ultimately I think I'm going to just remove the lid. I considered trying to reattach this lip to a lower spot in the back so that the lid wouldn't ride so high, but ultimately I don't think I can make that work. I'm really not happy that I went through all the trouble to make the lid first, sew the compression straps to it, and then attach the lid to the back panel, and then basically have to build the entire backpack with the lid attached to ultimately now just remove the lid. But you live and learn. So what I'm going to have to do now is seam rip through all of these bar tacks that I use to sew these compression straps to the lid. Now the lid itself, I mean, it looks great. I feel like I did a pretty good job on it, so I'm going to hang on to it, and eventually it will have it stay in the sun. I'll try and incorporate it into a different design later on down the road. Who knows when that will happen, if it ever does, but I will be hanging on to it. And I'll probably be replacing that lid with something much simpler, just like the Alice pack. Now the lid on the Alice pack is a real simple design. You got a top layer material, a bottom layer material. They do incorporate some hook and loop closure at the bottom here, and then they just cover the entire thing around the edges in grosgrain ribbon, and then they sew that lid right to the collar of the backpack. So I'll probably be doing something more like that. I did want the lid to have a slightly different shape than the Alice pack, so I'll probably be incorporating a seam kind of like you see on my Blackhawk butt pack here. You'll notice there is a seam sewn to this lid that gives it just a slight concave shape here. This, by the way, is eventually what happens to all Cordura after enough use. So I'll get to sewing that, and I'll get back to you eventually with hopefully a much more functional backpack.